my pleasure to welcome you to your first official lesson with Mr. J's masterpiece theory. You might be asking yourself, what's with the ladder? Well, today, my friends, we will be discussing the major scale. Oh, Mr. J, how I have waited for this day. Oh yes, I know you have. And indeed, it is here. Yes, it has arrived. Now, tonight when I was changing my light, I thought it would be absolutely spiffing for us to begin our discussion on scales with the origin of the word scale, which of course is scala. Well, for those of you whose etymology is a bit rusty, scala is the Italian word for ladder. And in today's lecture, this ladder will represent the steps of the major scale. The first 5 notes, or the pentachord of the major scale, is do, re, mi, fa, so, fa, mi, re, do. Now tell me, how excited are you? Well then, shall we begin? So, if you read Chapter 5 before today's lesson, you have learned that the major scale is the most common scale used in Western music, and also the happiest. Tonality, the final frontier of music. These are the pitches of the diatonic major scale. Its continuing mission: to explore strange new melodic patterns, to seek out new rhythms and new syncopations, to boldly go where no musical term has gone before. Oh, I'm so sorry. Got a little carried away there. Excited about this lesson. Anyway, what is tonality, you may ask? Well, tonality, simply stated, is the organization of pitch. Now, in our solar system, we have an organization of planets, the sun being the center point around which the planets revolve. Tonality is similar to this, in that when we think of tonic, or the first note of a scale, as the sun, the other pitches have a certain gravitational pull toward that note. Some notes are further away from tonic, and some are very close and lead very closely to it. The point is, though, that all notes in tonal music have a gravitational musical pull towards a single pitch. For example, Early One Morning, an English folk song, starts on F, ends on F, and this melody surrounds or has a gravitational pull towards that note, tonic, which is F major. Here's his. Ba-dum-bum-bum-bum. That C wants to lead back, so, do, back to do, on the downbeat of measure 5. The second half of this phrase, so the second phrase of this melody, hearing the E lead to the F, T, do. So the melody is surrounding F, leading us to that point. So, all melodies are structured around a single pitch, the tonic note, as we mentioned earlier. So those melodic structures, or those melodic patterns, are based on a specific scale pattern, which in the intro, as we learned, comes from the word scala, which means ladder. Any group of pitches that are scalar pitches, scalar patterns, are most often arranged in ascending and descending patterns of steps, similarly to a ladder, moving up or down by step. And those are half steps and whole steps in different combinations. The combination of the whole and half step patterns determine the type of scale. There are many different types of scales. The type of scale, or the mode of the scale, the color of the scale, determines the color of the melody on which that scale is based. So when we have scales, they're the building blocks of tonal music. Now, in Middle Eastern music, we have numerous types of scales, and in India, South Asia, those are called ragas. The Bhairav raga sounds like this: the C, D flat, E, F, G, A flat, B. It has a very Middle Eastern sound to it, and therefore the music that is based on that scale is going to have a certain color to it as well. Now, if you've had some previous music theory experience, you may have noticed that the Bailawal scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, has a resemblance to our Western C major scale. So some of these scales, and the Asavari scale similarly, has a very similar and exactly the same patterns as our natural minor scale. So some of them are going to sound more Western, and some of them are going to sound more Middle Eastern. And that will determine the color of the melody. Now, Western music is usually based on one of two types of scales, the major scale or the minor scale. Obviously, one is meant to sound happy and the other sad. If I was to play a melody, Mary Had a Little Lamb, in a major scale, C major, now, if I was to transpose that melody to a minor key, oh, the poor lamb, and now the lamb is dead. It changes the color of that scale. Now, what is Western music? Oftentimes we refer to Western music as classical music, say, the music of Mozart. However, the branches of Western music have extended well beyond that of the 18th century classical styles. We have Elvis Presley, rock and roll music.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, you're crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog.
Or musical theater. Wicked is an example of a very popular musical. This is in a minor scale. There's much more dissonance than that of Mozart or Elvis, but it is still tonal music. Even Katy Perry is an example of tonal music. Obviously, this style sounds much different than the ones previous, but it is still tonal music. It is music in which one note is the most important.
Drifting through the wind, wanting to start again. Do you ever feel this so paper like a house of cards, one blow from caving in? Do you ever feel?
So the tonality or the tonal structure is all the notes are moving towards, have a gravitational pull towards the tonic note, the home note, in all cases. Now, when you look at all the notes that we have in music, we have not just the white notes on the piano, but we also have black notes as well. When we use all half steps, ascending sharps or descending with the flats, we get all the notes in the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale meaning all chromatic half steps, C to C sharp, D to D sharp, E to F, the naturally occurring diatonic half step, and then F to F sharp, G to G sharp, and so on and so forth. As we come down the scale, we flat, B to B flat, chromatic half step, A to A flat, and we get this sound. So those are ascending and descending chromatic scales starting on C. Now, the chromatic scale actually seldom functions as a musical scale in music. Its purpose, however, is to color or flavor a musical melody. If we just use all of the notes of the diatonic scale, that is, the notes that are in the key signature, music would be very boring and bland, similar to a vanilla ice cream cone. Of course, all of us would prefer the one on the right that has more flavor, more color, more interest. The chromatic scale, the notes of the chromatic scale, allow us to play with some of those colors and flavors in our music. One of the most important aspects of tonality, the structure of pitch, is to understand the relationship of the pitch to each other within the scale and within a melody. So most scales are made up of whole steps and half steps, but some scales have intervals, that is the distance between notes, that are larger than that of a whole step or a half step. For example, the pentatonic scale, on which a lot of music is based, most musical folk styles, even some Eastern music, Japanese music, Chinese music, uses that as the pentatonic scale. Today, however, we are going to be focusing on the elements of the major scale. Now, the major scale has interval patterns of 5 whole steps and 2 diatonic half steps. However, those half steps must occur in the same place for every major scale. They're always between the 3rd and the 4th notes, and the 7th and 8th notes, or the octave. So in a C major scale, they occur here between E and F. As we've discussed, that is one of our 2 naturally occurring diatonic half steps. And then B to C. So between 3 and 4, and 7 and 8. So in C major, we can create this half-step, whole-step pattern without using any black keys on the piano, due to the naturally occurring diatonic half steps between E and F, and those between B and C. Now, the most important aspect of the major scale is the relationship between G and C, or the 5th note of the scale and the top note, and the leading tone, the 2nd note from the top, or the 7th scale degree, to the tonic. Those 2 notes will give us that gravitational pull towards tonic, which we call, in this case, C. Because we are in the key of C major, C is tonic. Within our tonal orbit, so to speak, of the major scale, the tonic is known as the home note, or the sun. We think of the tonic as the center point on which we base all of our other notes. So when you listen to a piece of music, you will hear in tonal music a natural aural, or sound-based, gravitational pull towards that tonal note, or the tonic note. The center of gravity, in this case, is C in C major. And you're like, wait, Mr. Johnson, you didn't finish the chord. Well, that's the point. When you're hearing that gravitational pull towards tonic, most musicians get driven crazy if I don't give them that C chord. They hear that G, and they need it to resolve sometime. And yes, it will eventually resolve back to C. As you all take a sigh of relief. That is tonality, the gravitational pull towards tonic. Now, of course, music isn't always in the key of C. I see, you say. Ah, yes. Well, in G major scale, it's the same half note and whole step patterns that we have. It just starts on G instead of C. So a whole step between G and A to B is another whole step, and then there we have the half step between scale degrees 3 and 4. B to C, still a naturally occurring diatonic half step. However, as we go to the top part of the scale, D, E, F, this would be 5, 6, and 7. We have to have a half step between 7 and 8, between T and Do. That is not a half step, because that is not the naturally occurring diatonic half step. It occurs here between the 6th and 7th notes of the scale, so therefore we have to raise the F to F sharp, and then we get the same type of scale. Leading tone F to G. So that would be our G major scale. There may be some of you who recall playing Tetris as a child. I always think longingly back to my Tetris playing days. Basically, Tetris is a game of shapes, specifically creating lines with different building blocks. Oh, the feeling you get when you get the 4 shapes all at once, called a Tetris. A tetrachord is a similar type of structure in which we build in notes of 4 with half steps and whole steps. A major tetrachord is whole step, half step. When we have a tetrachord, whole step between C and D, D to E, whole step, and then a half step between 3 and 4, E to F, that creates a tetrachord. The upper tetrachord, whole step between G and A, whole step between A and B, and a half step between B and C. Those both create what we call in music tetrachords, whole step, half step. When you have 2 tetrachords connected by a whole step in the middle, that creates the notes for the major scale. Any 4-note segment of a scale or tone row, and when we are talking about the major tetrachord, we are talking about the whole step, half step relationship. Now, once we have our major scale, or any scale for that matter, each scale degree has a specific name. Often, we will refer to it as scale degree 1, scale degree 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. Now, when we are sight singing, we will represent each of those numbers with a syllable called solfege. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So instead of using numbers, we will just replace it with a syllable. And we'll discuss in class why we use those different systems. When we build chords on each of these pitches, we use Roman numerals to represent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1 again as we get back to C. But the most exciting thing about this is that each scale degree has its own name and its own function within the scale. A tonic note, we've already talked about, is 1 or 8. But all the other notes have their own names and their own functions. Supertonic. Super is from the Latin word super, which means above. So scale degree 2 we call above tonic or supertonic. The mediant note, that comes from another Latin word, mediare, which means in the middle. So when we have our tonic triad, tonic note, mediant note, dominant note, the mediant is right in the center. Dominant is 5. It's the second most important note other than tonic, which is why we call it the dominant. And then the 4 is the subdominant. Well, you're saying, why is this 6 called the submediant when it's not below the mediant? Sub meaning below, mediant. Well, it's because the 6th scale degree wants to lead us to the 3rd scale degree. So we have C, submediant, which wants to lead us to mediant, to the subdominant, leading to the dominant, and back to tonic. So the function of each of the notes of the scale will help us to determine the proper structure of our melodies. Please take a moment to write down each of these scale degree functions and their names on your paper. So the first scale degree to review is tonic, as we've already discussed. Scale degree 2 we call supertonic. The 3rd scale degree is mediant. 4th is subdominant, which is below the dominant, which is scale degree 5. Submediant 6. The 7th note of the scale is the leading tone, and this is perhaps another one of the other very important notes, because when we are using chords, the leading tone will lead us back to home. There's a leading tone that wants to go back to here. Now is the moment you've been waiting for all day. Your chance to try these on your own, to build these scales and feel like a real music theorist. So, take out your Chapter 5 packets, which the sub has for you, and what we are going to do is we are going to go through some of the odd examples for you to practice together with this video, and then I will give you the opportunity to work on your own or in groups, small groups, to work all of the evens. And if you have time between the 2 days when I'm absent, complete the entire Chapter 5 packet. If you complete all of Chapter 5, feel free to move ahead and read Chapter 6, for when I return on Friday, we will delve into the wonderful world of key signatures. Now, when you are building a scale, the first step always is to build a diatonic scale. Diatonic scale meaning through the tones. So we have here D to D. This is number 1 on Practice Materials 5.1 in your packets, which should be right after the intro lesson with the video. And what you're going to do first is try to use all the notes, all the lines and spaces between the octaves. So we would write D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and D. D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and D. Once you have your diatonic scale built, then you need to determine where the half steps and whole steps are. Well, D is scale degree 1, so E would be scale degree 2. F would be scale degree 3. Now, if you recall, we have a tetrachord D, E, F, G, and that tetrachord must be whole step, and half step between 2 and 3. Now, if you look between 3 and 4. Whole step here, which there is, D to E, that is a whole step. E to F, that is not a whole step. Uh-oh, trouble. What are we going to do? Well, you cannot change the E. You cannot alter that note because we've already determined that D to E is already a whole step. So we can't alter the E or else that would mess up that relationship. So what we have to do is alter this note so that it is a whole step, thereby creating a half step between this, and this, F and G. So all we do is simply sharp the F, and that gives us the relationship D, E, F sharp to G, thereby giving us a whole step between scale degree 2 and 3, and a half step, therefore, between scale degree 3 and 4. Now, as we look at the upper part of the scale, the top tetrachord, which would be A, B, C, and D. So A to B, that is a whole step. B to C, naturally occurring diatonic half step. It's supposed to be a whole step. We need a whole step here, we need a whole step here, and we need a half step right there. In that case, we would again sharp the C and then move to D. I apologize for my horrible handwriting. Let's do one more. E major. Again, step 1, build all the notes between E and E, the octaves. So E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. Don't forget any, or you'll get yourself into trouble. So draw those on the staff. Line, space, line, space, line, space, line, space. And of course, you notice I fill in my note heads as best I can on this iPad. But they don't do this, but I would prefer that you put the note heads filling them in so that it doesn't imply any rhythm. A filled in note head with no stem. So now, we have to double check our patterns. Is there a whole step between E and F? No, that's one of our naturally occurring diatonic half steps. So right away we have an issue. We must raise the F a half step, thereby creating a whole step between 1 and 2. Now, do we have a half step between F sharp and G? No, another problem. That's a half step, F sharp to G. So now we have to raise the G another half step to G sharp. And now we have whole step from E to F sharp, and we have a whole step between F sharp and G sharp. Now we need to have a half step between scale degrees 3 and scale degree 4. E is scale degree 1, F sharp scale degree 2, G sharp scale degree 3, and A is scale degree 4. Is there a half step between G sharp and A? Well, of course, the answer to that is yes. There is a half step, therefore we do not need to alter the A. That is tetrachord 1, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. Whole step, half step. Now let's look at tetrachord 2. We call that TC1 plus TC2 equals major scale. So if we look at the top tetrachord, B, C, D, and E. There's a whole step connecting the tetrachords, if you recall. So A to B is a whole step, so we don't have to alter B. Now, is B to C a whole step? Because that is the first to the second note of the tetrachord must be a whole step, and it is not. Again, B to C, naturally occurring diatonic half step. We need a whole step there. Therefore, sharp the C. Is there a whole step between C sharp and D? Well, of course not. We need another whole step, so sharp the D. And now we have a half step where it's supposed to be between the 7th and 8th scale degrees. So now we have our E major scale built correctly with tetrachord 1, whole step between E and F sharp, whole step between F sharp and G sharp, and the half step between G sharp and A. Then the second tetrachord, B to C sharp, whole step, C sharp to D sharp, whole step, D sharp to E, half step. Now, if you're struggling with the whole steps and half steps, please go back on your own and read chapters 1 and 4 to discuss the difference between whole steps and half steps and how to build them on the staff, and that will help you very much. So here is the answers for number 1 and 3, written a little bit neater. E, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Again, just as review, we have whole step, half step. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tetrachord 1. Then we connect those with a whole step, and then we have TC2. Whole step, half step, thereby creating the D major scale. Answer to number 3, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. So check the answer. Always go back and check your work. So we have a whole step between 1 and 2. We have a whole step between 2 and 3. And we have a half step between 3 and 4, G sharp to A. We connect the tetrachord 1 by a whole step to tetrachord 2, which we have B to C sharp, whole step, C sharp to D sharp, whole step, and D sharp to E, half step, thereby giving us the E major scale. Now, over the rest of today and through tomorrow, please complete all the evens during class with the help from Mr. J, well, unfortunately I won't be here, or from fellow classmates. If you get done with all of the evens, and you still have time, sure, go back and do all the odds for extra practice. And if you complete all of that before the end of Thursday's class, then you may go ahead and read Chapter 6, Major Key Signatures. Now, when I come back, I know you're going to be so excited to see me because you've missed me so dearly as I've been gone, and you're going to be quite angry with me when I come back Friday, because I'm going to teach you key signatures. And if you know your key signatures, all the work that we just did with major scales is going to be much simpler. So you may ask yourself, why did I make you do all this tetrachord, half step, whole step? Well, we'll discuss that on Friday. Something to look forward to, my dear pupils. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all again on Friday's class. Happy learning!